So, welcome to the second episode of the Dive In series. We've got Maria here. Maria is an amazing climate activist. We first met her at Purposefest, and Maria did like an amazing talk with Beryl all about like the climate emergency and corporate activism. And me and Helena were super inspired and really wanted to have you on the podcast. So, hi Maria, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me and for such a kind and generous introduction. It's so nice to be here.
And we just want to learn more about you, learn about your story, and impart your amazing knowledge onto our listeners, because we had the pleasure of it, but we think everyone should hear it. So yeah, got a couple of like questions I think listeners would find interesting and useful. But yeah, see where we go. So I guess like the first bit is just I'd love to know a little bit more about you.
Okay. So yeah, at the moment I live in Bristol. I'm based in Bristol, and my job is I work in an engineering consultancy in sort of climate and energy consulting. So the idea is it's decarbonising energy systems and helping clients to reach their net zero goals. But before that, I lived in London, where I was at university studying physics. So quite that's kind of where I first started learning about the science of climate change and stuff like that. But outside of the climate activism stuff, or maybe it's part of it, but I love nature. I like to hike and forage in particular. I find that really good fun. And then there's a group of about 20 of you, and you just go to like a park or a little patch of forest or whatever, and you just go looking for mushrooms, and then you're like, oh, what's this one? And they're like, oh, it's an interesting name. And it's just really nice way to like have a social, lovely walk in the woods, but also kind of getting to know your surroundings better. I find it's really helpful to like build your connection with nature if you kind of know what it is that's surrounding you, if you kind of understand what purpose that plant plays in the wider ecosystem or whatever. That I think that's a really nice way of feeling more at home in a kind of natural space.
Yes, like that, everything that like you say, like you do kind of when you were like, oh, I don't see my climate activism as separate to your like being and like your lifestyle and your hobby. So how did you stumble and grow into climate activism, I guess, because like you've had a really amazing like journey in it so far?
Yeah, great question. So when I was at uni, I wasn't that involved that directly with any kind of climate activism. I mean, I was always quite aware of the climate crisis and knew that we need to do something about it, you know, even from when I was a child. But you know, it's more just kind of, I'll go to the eco society meeting, or like do a bit of zero waste here and there, but nothing really proper. And I always imagined I'd go into plasma physics, actually. So that's like fixing nuclear fusion. That was my dream. Wow. And then I very quickly realized that's not my calling. It was fun, but I kind of ended up feeling so very like removed from like so many steps away, and we've got enough solutions without having to invent nuclear fusion, which might never be invented, sort of thing. So yeah, I finished my degree, and I sort of realized I want to take on a role that's more directly impactful in the short term, which I appreciate that might be, I don't know, there's conversations to be had about like long term and short term, but understanding the urgency of the climate crisis as it is now, and given that so much of it is a social problem rather than a technical scientific problem, we've got the solutions, we just need to make them happen. That's what made me want to go into something like my current job, consulting, where it's helping people to implement the solutions that we already have, rather than necessarily making even more new solutions, which, you know, might be great, but isn't the first priority to me, at least.
Yeah. When you're saying it's a social problem rather than a technical problem, what do you like mean by that? Like, let's like dive into that one.
What I mean by that is that we have the tools to combat climate change. We just need to actually implement them. So what I'm talking about is we have renewable energy. meanwhile, billions of pounds are pumped into fossil fuels still every year to this day. The UK government has over 100 new oil licenses ready to go ahead. Meanwhile, it's getting increasingly difficult to, set up renewables farms and things like this. And so it's about attitudes, and it's about, maybe it's not social will, maybe it's political will, if anything. It's about that's just in our power supply, for example, or if we're looking at transport, if in Bristol we've seen how the buses are being cut left, right and centre, and so how else are people going to get around if they can't cycle, or they don't feel safe cycling? They're going to have to drive in a private vehicle, right? And so that's another example of where it's a political issue of, if we funded our public transport properly, we'd be able to cut our emissions. And it's things like this where we've got a lot of technology, we've made huge strides in our technology over the past few years and a few decades, but it's the horribly slow implementation in change and policy to make those things happen that's actually causing the problems.
Yeah, and like things like, because you see all these things pop up all the time, like the clean air zone in Bristol, like thinking like locally, and so I guess, this is a bit of a question, but what kind of frustrates you the most about current actions? Like one thing that you're just like, that is so easily solvable.
That is such a good question. That is so easily solvable. I think there are three main things that are the lowest hanging fruit, which maybe in the weird, complicated political bureaucracy are not as easy as I might quote unquote naively think they are. But when we're dealing with international emergencies, sometimes things are as simple as just doing it. So I think there are three things that we do need to do. Firstly, we need to maximize sort of retrofit and insulation in all our homes and buildings. So we saw that being called for by the Insulate Britain group, and now that's on the agenda of every political party. We're getting there, because buildings and the heating of buildings, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's a really big proportion of our national emissions. And so if we increase our insulation, not only will we reduce our emissions, but we'll also reduce our bills in this cost of living crisis, because we won't need as much energy to heat the space. I think the second thing is no new fossil fuels. That's just so simple. That should be the first thing. No new fossil fuels. Why are we still funding fossil fuels, subsidies, exploring new oil fields, licensing new oil fields? That we've got enough in the UK for, I think it's about 7 years now. If we just continue with what we currently have, that is enough time to make the transition to a clean electricity system. I think the third thing is, I mentioned public transport, so that maybe that's the third thing, but I got one more, which I think is often not necessarily tied in, but it's about diet. So I think if we move to a more, I'm not saying everyone needs to be 100% vegan, but on average, if we had a more plant-based diet, that would do enormous things for reducing our carbon emissions, because the carbon intensity per unit calories is so much greater with meat, particularly beef, than it is for vegetarian and vegan sources of protein and energy. So that's, and plus, the wider problems of agriculture, of driving deforestation and pesticides, poisoning soils, all of this. So I think diet is a really low hanging fruit.
There's been some stuff in the news about like there not being a big enough demand for plant-based substitutes in supermarkets. Don't know if you saw that. Like, how can we encourage people? Like, do you have any ideas of what would convert people?
Yeah, I do. And I think, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but again, it's a political issue. So meat and dairy is subsidized by the government, while plant-based things are not. In fact, there are so many hoops that plant-based companies have to jump through. There's a whole scandal with plant-based drinks not being able to use the word meat, milk even on their cartons. All these things that the politics is making it difficult to have parity between these options. I think if things were the same price and things had the same you know, positioning on shelves. I think we wouldn't need to be forcing people to do these things. It would be people would like to, you know, it would be it's just facilitating. I don't want to get, you know, be making anyone change their diets, but I feel like a lot of people, if they understood the issues, they might want to change their diet and then would be able to.
Yeah. And I guess it is like, it's hard when we speak about these wider changes that we know that we don't really have any control over. And I guess like a lot of people are experiencing like a lot of climate anxiety. And what is in your opinion, the most effective way to get people to like act on this? Like what will make the people at the top act? Do you think and then I guess again a personal question, and I don't want to tongue tie anyone up here, but like, do you think they ever will?
Yeah, great question. I think in terms of getting people to act, there's two categories of people, right? There's there's the everyday people. You mentioned this climate anxiety. It's a huge problem. I have it a lot myself, and kind of upsettingly, it can often manifest kind of back to front, in that when you get such strong climate anxiety, you therefore become sort of paralyzed and unable to do anything about the climate, because you're so worried about it, and you can feel so disempowered in well, today's society, really. So I think for that, the thing I've found has helped most with maintaining some kind of motivation, inspiration, and sort of sense of hope is just being in a wider community of people who feel the same way. So that's one of the greatest things I sort of gained from joining several environmental activist and campaign groups, is just that community of just people who get it, who they can, you know, hold and support you, well, each other through it, and then collectively together all sort of do something about it. And so I think that takes us on to the second point, which is about how to get those in power, or those, you know, who have the power to take action. And how can we make them do anything? And that, well, I might be a little bit biased here based on some of the organizations I've been I'm sort of proud to be part of. But if we look through history, right, any major radical social change that happened, it was not gained by signing a petition or walking on the pavement with a banner. No one listens to that, because the powers that be can ignore it, because it doesn't benefit them, and so they don't care. Just, oh, whatever, they're just signing a petition. No one will turn up to the House of Parliament to the House of Commons to debate the issue, even if it reaches enough signatures. All of this, it's easy to ignore. And so if we look through history, all real change, it has been achieved through disruptive protest, and almost always the more successful ones have been non-violent. And so that's what I believe. Non-violent disruptive protest is the way to bring about change. We look at how we got our weekend, our workers' rights, women's rights, civil rights, gay rights, and the list goes on and on. Every time that these social conditions changed for the better, it wasn't asked for politely, it was demanded, because the people worked together collectively, banded together, and disrupted the system such that the powers that be couldn't ignore them anymore, and they had to have their demands met. It's a constant battle between those that are in power, who like it as it is, and the rest of us who need it to be better. And so to follow that model. And so I think we will eventually win. We have to because there isn't really an alternative. The planet is at stake. The health of all people, the lives of all people, and the health of our entire planet is at stake. So we have to succeed. And that's the beauty of attrition, just going back and back and back until you achieve what you need to achieve. And I do believe there are enough people who care enough, and we're constantly growing to enable that to happen. And you can see little tiny shifts happening, tiny cracks showing in the, complete authority. And I think we'll get there. Maybe not as quickly as I'd like, but it's inevitable that we'll win if we keep going.
I was at Glastonbury a couple of weeks ago, and that is basically it's a very, very protest-filled festival. And I was looking around, and there's all these people like cheering to all these things, but then like they would like drop their rubbish, or I kind of just felt like, are these guys just going to go back to their lives, and I guess, what would you say for these people who could get inspired but are going to go back into the rat race, or like maybe they work in the city or whatever, or go back to their normal lives? What are some things that they could implement? What are some things that they could support that will actually take on meaningful change after perhaps being inspired by one event or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've done a lot of work with public outreach and things like that. Through my work with various climate activist groups, and I see this all the time. People come to a talk or an event and I'm like, wow, this is amazing, how do I get involved? And then a week later they're like, sorry, I've got this and that and the other, I've got to do that. And it's totally fair. You've got to feed your family, you've got to you can't lose your job, you've got to pay your rent, all of this, there's no blame game here. It's not about the individual, it's about the institution. Is something I say probably too much, because we can't blame you. I can't remember what the quote is, but it's something like, you can't help but be a hypocrite in a twisted society, or something like this. You have no choice. If you want to exist, you have to engage somehow with the problematic side of society, and so you can't blame people for engaging with it, because otherwise they so that's just my first disclaimer of just like, that sucks, but also I get it. The second thing, the second side of it, which is what can people do, is I suppose, well, I guess one thing which might sound a bit, I don't know, airy fairy, but it is just like really trying to maybe engage with nature, perhaps. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head now, but I live right near a tiny little river, and every day I walk or cycle past it on my way to work, and it's always just like full of plastic trash. And I mean, you can't get to it because there's like loads of fences, so I can't even go and pick it out. But I don't know, seeing that, like me trying to engage with nature but seeing it be destroyed, it is like motivation enough to sort of keep engaged with the issues. I feel that if one gets very sort of boxed into daily life without ever taking a minute to breathe and look at the world around us, then of course you're going to forget about the world around us. And I appreciate that's a bit of a it's a privilege to be able to spend some time in nature, even if it's just going through a really leafy bit of river on my way to work. But I think that can be a really powerful way of remembering, like, oh God, that there's so much more to life than my 9 to 5.
I completely agree with you, and I think we're so lucky. Like every time my friends come from London to visit, they always say it's amazing that you can just like cycle, I don't know, 15-20 minutes and you'll be in the middle of nowhere. And it is just like, we're so lucky. But I guess for people who do kind of, obviously, everyone spends time on their phones. Do you have any like inspiring people that you follow, or anything that, because like recommendations for listeners?
So I not the best for suggesting people to follow, because I've actually tried to unplug as best I can from most of social media. But what I will say is, I think what I would recommend, or what I would encourage my friends to do at least, is like block the Sun and the Daily Mail as step one. To follow independent and conscious news sources. Say The Guardian, Double Down News is a great I guess news thing that George Monbiot and his friends set up, and they report on important topics, or like Novara Media, things like this. to get, quite an honest look at these social and environmental problems. And then also following the social accounts of various different climate activist groups. It is not the same. You don't if you're scared of joining the group for whatever implications, following them on Instagram is absolutely
it's not a crime. It's not a
at
crime.
least not yet anyway, but it's absolutely not a crime, and they share a lot of really interesting information that's specific to the cause, right? So if you care a lot about sewage in the rivers, follow Surfers Against Sewage, for example. Is it Fergal Sharkey? There are specific people. Or if you care about fossil fuels, follow Just Stop Oil, Fossil Free London, these kinds of things, because they will be sharing well fact-checked, interesting pieces of news related to those topics, and through that maybe you'll be able to find specific inspiring people that resound well with you. But I think one of the biggest problems is this whole perpetuation of like fake news and sort of vilification of people who care. And so a really low level way of just being a really law-abiding and head down activist is just not disagreeing with the activists and not letting the tabloids make you hate them, even if you don't want to sort of money or volunteer time or any of this, just quietly not hating them. that in itself, that is a form of resistance. Absolutely.
Amazing. Yeah, because that's I often feel like this constant growing division that is fueled by like clickbait and stuff, and me and my friends talk about it a lot, that if everyone could just listen to each other, the world would be a better place. And again, could be airy fairy, like, but it's again, I'm like, that is all it takes, is an honest, open conversation, and there'll be a whole lot going on. And so I guess when you're talking about disruptive protests, like, do you, and I saw that Veril got like what I thought, personal opinion, was unfairly grilled when he went on the news about tactics. But like, I guess for some people who might be like, oh, why do you have to do such I mean, the example of like the throwing paint and stuff, like why do you have to do that? Like, what do you say to that?
Great, it is an FAQ.
Yeah, literally. So I know you must get asked it a lot. So
No, it's great. If I do get asked it a lot, but it doesn't mean I've got a particularly coherent answer. But I'll try my best, because I've got an opinion. It's just putting it into words. So I think, right. So firstly, I think there are two main goals, in my opinion, of doing disruptive protest. The first is to get the word out, to get media attention, to get public engagement.
Yeah.
And so when you do, as I sort of mentioned before, a well-behaved protest, you don't get any media attention. No one pays any attention to you. For example, we look at the big one, that Extinction Rebellion put on in April of this year. I think it was around 60,000 people from across the country came to London to relatively quietly come together and protest against the continued destruction of our planet. Very, very, very little news coverage of this.
I'm so happy that you brought that one up, actually, just like quick diversion, because I remember we were in London the day before for work and we couldn't stay, but we went and gave Finisterre some coffee because they were having their meetup before the protest, and we were like, we want your protesters to be fueled and like have an amazing day tomorrow, blah blah. And then I remember the next week like googling it, being like, why have I not and there was like nothing, and so I'm happy you brought that one up, because that did kind of perplex me.
Yeah, it's the prime example of well-behaved protests don't get any attention. And then we talk about the soup action. 2 kids throw a bit of soup on a painting. The painting is undamaged, just to absolve any criticisms. The painting was undamaged. It was covered by glass. everybody has heard about it. It's a Halloween costume. People have got earrings of it. People have got t-shirts of it. Like everybody now knows about the campaign Just Stop Oil, and as a result has the phrase Just Stop Oil in their head. Start thinking about, what is oil? Why should we stop it? What's the issue with oil? And it starts this conversation, right? So that's the first kind of quite obvious, I suppose, reason for the disruptive protest. And you may say, well, everyone, you get bad press. Verrill wouldn't have got onto GB News or wherever he was if there hadn't been these high profile disruptive protests. These activist groups only get a platform on these high profile radio and TV shows after a highly disruptive action. They don't get on those shows after a march or after a banner drop. Okay. And so the second reason is a bit more subtle, and I think a lot of people sometimes miss this, but it's about the disruption itself. So this is particularly applied to the actions that involve road blocking, especially in central London, and the actions involving the oil terminals themselves, and the slow marches that are currently happening. So if normal life is disrupted in this way, what happens is a material disruption, right? So there's a reduced flow of traffic, therefore potentially reduced, commerce. Some businesses can't open, which I want to interrupt myself now and say the fact that ordinary people get wrapped up in this is very much is awful, and it's a really sad unwanted side consequence. And that's why it happens in London a lot. So if you've caused this material disruption, you've affected the flow of money in this business or in this city. And what do the powers that be care about more than anything else? They don't care about well-being or safety or health or the planet. They care about their pockets being full of lovely cash. And so if we are disrupting the economic system by disrupting the flow of traffic or the flow of oil or whatever it is, that is when they stop and listen, because you put it into terms that they understand and can engage with. If you put it in terms of human lives, they're like, I don't care, where's my check? If you put it in terms of, oh, you're going to get less money next year, suddenly that's a problem. And so it's translating it into a problem that these people can understand, and that's the beauty of sustained disruption, and that's why the slow marches are happening. I think we're in week 12 or 13 of slow marching every single day in central London. That's why the oil terminals were occupied for several weeks last April. That's why the M25 has been blocked by activists, etc., because it causes that material disruption.
I had two questions, and one of them I can remember, and the other one I really liked, and I don't know why I've forgotten it.
Oh no, sorry.
No, it was just off that, like the first one I thought of halfway through, and then you just said something else, and I was like, oh my god, I want to ask about that. We were talking about. Okay, you know what? I'll go for the first one. So, if you could sit down and have a no holds barred dinner, or longer than a dinner's too short. No holds barred dinner with someone tomorrow, who would it be? Who would you want to influence the most? Like one singular person or one singular company? If you could just sit down and tell someone how it is and give them like you say, like real answers, like they're amazing solutions. Who would it be? Long-winded, but
oh my gosh, that is a really difficult question, right? I was initially going to think of a global leader like a Biden or Sunak or something, but they've all been briefed on this 100,000 times. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that we are on the highway to climate hell, and that we need to that's a quote, and that we need to make our emissions drop by 2030 if we have any chance of surviving. He says that the real disruptive villains or whatever are the oil and gas companies. So he, the UN Secretary General, understands this. So these high-level people know all of this stuff. So I refuse to believe that these people are going ahead because they don't understand the problem. It's just that they choose to decide that it's not their priority.
Yeah.
So I know it's not the answer to your question, but but just to repeat my previous point on that, this is why it's a social and political problem, right? It's about priorities more than anything, because everyone understands the problem. Most people understand the science behind it. It's just about making people care about it more than they care about their profits. And that's the problem. But who I would sit down with would be potentially, if I could persuade, I don't know, like Shell to totally divest from fossil fuels. I'm trying to think of like a long-term plan. They totally divest fuels. Maybe that'll have a huge knock-on effect. They've set a precedent now for big fossil fuel companies divesting, going to renewables, and probably making a killing, or at least not collapsing, because people still need electricity. They just need it generated elsewhere.
I think that kind of also leads perfectly into, I was thinking, like, I think a lot of people, like you say, think profit can't come from good. And so when you came and spoke at Purposefest, and how it was the B Corp community, and if people listening don't know what B Corp is, I would highly recommend going to read about it. But essentially, it's a group of businesses that have been verified for the like highest environmental and social standards of like transparency and performance. And do you think do you think movements like the B Corp movement, showing that profit can be balanced with purpose, do you think that is like I know we spoke about corporate activism at Purposefest, but do you think that is a big shift? Like, do you reckon that could really make a big change? And so showing that profit doesn't have to be done like badly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I've been talking about profit, I mean these like runaway, ridiculous, record-breaking profits of billions and billions, right? I don't mean just like having a business that doesn't collapse. So I definitely, I think the B Corp movement is a really beautiful movement, because it shows that, you know, exactly, you described it better than I can, that you can balance profit with purpose, and I think that's a really important thing. And if every company in the world was a B Corp, I think the world would be a much better place, because how do we get, not to go on a massive tangent about billionaires, but you only get that level of money if you've not paid the rest of your people fairly, and if you've cut corners in quality. And, you know, I think there's a wider point, maybe a few stepping stones down the line beyond B Corp, towards, you know, the concept of degrowth, which I'm not going to pretend I know very much about, other than the sort of high level stuff. But the concept of, you know, degrowth, or also like donut economics, all these new economic sort of structures that have been proposed, which I think are show a lot of promise, since we're starting to notice the very clear correlation between overconsumption and this constant growth rhetoric being directly related to our, you know, demise, as it were. So balancing profit with purpose is exactly what we need to do, and where we go forward with that, how that evolves over the next few years and decades, is I think going to be a really interesting and critical sort of point to see how we can continue having some kind of society and some kind of economy, not at all the one we have today. I want to I did just to interrupt you, but I just had a thought on who I would sit down with. Can I give my answer?
Tell me.
I would love to sit down with the people in control of the Daily Mail. I think so much misinformation and you know, misinformation, particularly about climate and social issues, so much intentional but unnecessary sort of division and hatred and whatever, is driven by, as you said, clickbaity, tabloidy social media content and also traditional media content, that if all of our media was honest and true and responsible, the population of the world would be better educated, more properly educated on these important issues, and could therefore make better, more informed decisions about their own lives, about who they vote for, about who they support, about who they send hate mail to, about what they buy in the shops. When we were talking about our plant-based choices, all of this kind of stuff. And I think the media has an enormous role to play in how our entire system operates, and it is often overlooked. I don't think it's overlooked, but it's downplayed quite how important and how powerful it is.
Yeah, if you could see my face right now, you'd see that I'm absolutely grinning. Like that is that's kind of where I think it all comes down to. We're talking about it in the office actually. Like the root of all evil is miseducation and like misinformation. Like it is literally the root of all evil. Because not everyone is given the privilege of like having the time in their day to like go through, I don't know, like you say, like going through a Just Stop Oil or a Greenpeace or anything. Like they don't have the time in their day to look through that website or whatever. But that is such a good answer. I love it. 10 out of 10. Yeah.
Great.
Like, because I'm conscious that I don't want to like use up heaps of your time. I guess like the last thing I kind of want to say is like kind of basically plug the stuff that you love and you think everyone should love. Like where can we help causes? And yeah, that could be at individual level, that could be corporate level, like
Okay. Again, one of those questions which is surprisingly hard to actually answer. But what can people do? So I'm almost reluctant to name specific causes and organizations because I'm not going to list everything that's important, So I think we kind of touched on this a little bit at the Purposefest as well, but it's about thinking what is it that you care about most in this world. It's there's a really great exercise actually that I did as part of an active hope workshop a few months ago. And so active hope is the concept of hoping for something whether or not you think it's feasible to happen, as opposed to very something that's probably going to happen, and then doing everything you can to act, like making sure all your decisions and actions go towards trying to make that sort of dream happen, right? So this beautiful exercise was, we just sat in like silence with our eyes shut for a couple of minutes and just thought about the future that we want to see for ourselves, whatever it might be. Just what is your ideal world, and what are the properties, so if you love animals, it might be used, in somewhere where there's beautiful wild animals enjoying themselves, not, being mistreated, etc., or whatever it is. And then based on what you decide or realize that your priorities and things you care about most are, then I would say don't be afraid. It sounds really silly, but don't be afraid to go and support those causes. It's not, as I said, it's not yet a crime in the UK to support a cause, and no one's asking you to sort of go the full way straight away to taking action that might end up in arrest or something like that. You could be following a Twitter page, it could be going to a meeting, it could just be donating a £5, or just even anything like that, talking to your mates about it, making a really small lifestyle change. But what's really nice to think about is just having that hope and not giving in. I hear a lot of people, actually, people I went to university with and stuff, saying, oh, it's all screwed anyway, why do I need to bother? I'm just going to go work in banking and might as well make a killing if we're all going to die anyway. That's the opposite point, and that is not only just that is going further than being a hypocrite in this twisted society. That is actively engaging and becoming complicit.
Actively being a hypocrite. Yeah.
And so it's avoiding complicity where possible, and resistance is trying to do your best and having hope for the future, and enjoying your life with your friends and doing the things that you care about. That is resistance to an extent, because in this society, if it's not bringing profit, then it's not good, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So if you're just having a lovely time with your friends, going on a walk, looking at the butterflies and thinking like, oh gosh, love this, then that's beautiful as well. And I know that it sounds really untangible, because I'm reluctant to tell people like, go and do this protest and go and do that, because it looks different to everyone, and it's not. I'm trying not to do a cop-out answer, but action looks different for everyone, depending on
that is,
your ability and your resources and your whatever.
Yeah, that is honestly not a cop-out at all. I absolutely love that. I feel like it's completely different context, but it's often we say at work, it's like doing nothing is still a choice, and if you do nothing, it's still a choice that you've not it's sitting there doing nothing and hoping that someone is going to take the problem away. It's still a choice, and like I think that exercise sounds bloody incredible. I'm literally like, we're doing a team day next week. We've got 2 new starters, yay! But I am definitely building that in, because also I don't know if this is again a Purposefest thing, and I know that I said I'd stop this, but this is like, it came back to me, and I really liked it. And another thing that I thought was really nice was the children's fire concept. So like, we've made a thing at work now where we're saying every single time we make a decision, you like have the imaginary children's fire, which is like an imaginary person from 50 years time. Like, what would they think of that decision? Like, is that going to help them? Will they get there? If like, will they be there if we make this decision? So like stuff like that, like all these kind of exercises, which some people might think, oh, you're just sitting there imagining stuff. Like, it's not. It's like you say, like conceptually thinking of your ideal world and then acting on it, I think is like really powerful. I absolutely love that. That's so good.
Yes, I passed.
I'm so my internet has been absolutely rubbish. But I'm so happy that you came on. Like, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, and yeah, it's just been epic. So I am going to stop hitting record in a sec if you want to say bye, and then I will like catch you on the flip side.
All right, well, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here today, and for letting me speak a little bit, just run my spiel. So really, really kind to have me, and I've had a really nice time speaking to you. Thank you so much.